In this video, we're going to take a look at UV mapping. UVs are points on a surface that describe a mappable area. Essentially, they provide a holdout area for images to be placed. Think of them as a clean sheet of paper being wrapped around your polygon object. Our goal with our UVs is to make them human readable. What this means is that we'll be able to look at the UVs and be able to tell what part of the object it is that we're looking at. Let's start by selecting our object and making sure that we have a clean piece of geometry before we go any further. Now what that means is that we want to remove our transforms as well as get rid of any history. So I'm going to choose Edit, Delete by Type, History, and I will also go to Modify, Freeze Transformations. And now let's take a look at our UV texture space. And I'm going to open it up in my window here and go to Panels, Panel, UV Texture Editor. And I have my object selected, and I can then see the UVs that are currently on that surface. We'll make this full screen here. My current UVs are coming from the primitive object that I started with. When I built the crow, I built it from a cube. So what we're seeing here is kind of a residual set of UVs that were spawned off of that original primitive cube. They're basically garbage. We don't need them. Instead of deleting them, I'm just going to reproject my UVs and ignore what I currently see here. Now in my UV texture editor, we have a set of grids here. We have a section of 4 different grids, and one of them is a darker gray area. This is our UV texture space. This is our normalized area, and it runs from 0 to 1 in both the U direction and the V direction. We can also go into a negative value and use the space that is here as well as below. But inside our UV texture area, we can use any space that we see here. It does not have to have a grid on it. And this grid just helps us block out sections of our UVs. Let's project something so that we can see how this works. And I'm going to go back over to our crow. And we'll start with a large section here. His wing is going to be pretty easy for us to project UVs onto. I'm going to right click and go to Face, and I will select all of the faces there for the wing, and I have both the front and the back. I'm going to go to Create UVs, and I'm going to choose Planar Mapping for my projection type. Now our goal here is to match our projection to our selection, or vice versa. In this case, I already have my selection made, and it's more or less a planar object. So I want to map it with a planar mapping. Now, some of the other options that we have there, the other types of projections, they would work in this case as well. I think planar is going to be the easiest for us. And let's just reset this here and take a look at our options. This is the most important one here. We want to project from a specific axis. These here, the X, Y, and Z axes, are going to be a planar projection, but our wing does not match one of those planes. Z would probably be the closest, but we'll get a little bit of distortion there because the wing is at an angle. So instead, I'm going to choose Camera, and this will allow me to define my own projection space. So I can just line up my camera to where I see those polygons in the best planar projection. And I'm also going to check Keep Image Width and Height Ratio. This will also prevent distortion. With my polygons selected, I'll choose Project. And now we get a projection manipulator, and you can see how that manipulator is at an angle. And it's actually a little off. I'd like to redo that, so I'm going to undo. And let's rotate down here a bit more, and we'll be able to see how this lines up. I already have my settings, so I'll just choose Create UVs, Planar Mapping. And there we go. So I rotated my camera a bit more, and now I have a better projection on there. So that's our first part. Now we can take a look at them inside of our UV texture space. Now they're automatically mapped to the 0 to 1 texture space, our normalized texture space. Ultimately, this is where we're going to put our UVs back into. But for right now, we can move them out and work on those UVs anywhere we want within this texture space. I always find it best to move them out. Therefore, when I project something new, it won't be projecting on something old. So I can keep them organized off to the side. Now, when we did this projection, we projected both the front and back. So I need to break these up so that I have a definitive back and front. I'm going to go out to my model where it's a little bit easier to make this selection and just go to Edge and double click the dividing line that goes through or separates my wing in half. So I'll just double click that. That'll give me an edge loop going all the way through the model, giving me a lot of extra edges that are being selected there. And you can see those here. I don't really care. I'm not going to deselect them because I've only projected these UVs. These here, we've already established are junk, so I don't care if they get cut up or mutated or whatever happens to them. I only care about what I see here. And so I will then go up and choose to separate those UVs or cut along that edge. We'll click that icon. And now I can grab a single UV and do Select Shell, and pull that away. And now I have a front and a back to the wing. Now when we project our UVs, it often happens that they're still distorted. It can be difficult to tell just by looking at the wireframe or the UV set, so we have a couple of extra tools that we can turn on and actually see how those UVs are being mapped. Inside of my UV texture editor, we have this icon right here, which will display a checkered tiled pattern. This pattern will also be applied to my model. And we'll just switch our renderer here. Make sure that we're using Viewport 2.0. That is the default inside of Maya now. Then I can look and see that that checkered pattern looks pretty good. I don't really see any distortion. Even the numbers and letters are coming out fine. This means that I have a good UV layout. I'm going to switch back and let's just turn that off. And we're going to take a look at one more option here to toggle our shaded UV display. Now what this is showing me is the front and the back side of my UVs. This is similar to what we were looking at with our normals on the surface. So here we're looking at the back of the UVs. Typically, we want to make sure that all of our UVs are facing front. So I could take this and flip it. I'm going to go to my marking menu and go to Shell and just click on there to select the entire shell. And I can use these buttons here to flip that UV shell. And we're just going to flip it that way for right now. We might flip it back later, but we'll just kind of see how this all works out. And now I get that blue color, which tells me it is facing front.